Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Frazer Grudgings, who's one of our senior consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. Today, Frazer and I are going to be talking about the people controls in Annex A of ISO 27001. So, Frazer, why is there a separate control theme for people controls?
Okay, hi Annie. I guess it's the term information security can often lead people to think of data security or cyber security, cyber attacks, cyber threats, things like that. And you don't often necessarily think of your people, your employees, but they are an incredibly important part of information security. If you think about businesses that are embarking on implementing information security management system, you want to develop a culture around information security, and you need your people to buy into that in order for that to be a success. And certainly if you want to allow your system to mature and get continual improvement, that's only really going to happen if you've got, the buy-in and the support of your people. So it's only natural that there are some controls around people. It's not something that's necessarily new. Obviously, there's been a new iteration of the standard in 2022. The theme has been changed to people. Previously, in the 2013 version, they were human resource security Annex A controls. So it's just been more rounded to focus around your employees and that sort of security posture. And if you also consider things like insider threat, so that's where your own employees create information security incidents. Now, that isn't necessarily done deliberately. They're not trying to cause harm. It's usually by mistake, or it's usually not following a process. And that's typically because there is potentially a weakness around how the people controls have been designed and implemented. And what you're trying to do is ensure that your employees are aware of your management system. They understand the importance of it, and that they're also trained on that management system and the relevant policies that are supported, or the policies that are relevant to them as a user of the management system. So it isn't necessarily things like the technical things that your IT department might be looking at. It's the more day-to-day stuff. So things like how you access business systems, they need to have awareness of that. The acceptable use of company assets, devices. There might be a separate policy around how to use the internet or the intranet. So these are things that are quite common in terms of causing security incidents, certainly from what URM have experienced and I've experienced. So what the controls are trying to do is put a company in the best position so that they can avoid these types of mistakes, happening more frequently, and limit those disruptions or those information security incidents. And if we think about when a company is recruiting people, so you might have a new starter, or it might be an individual is changing role. It might be a sideways movement, or it might be a promotion. There's certain information security aspects that a business needs to consider around that, and typically that is sort of bringing on the right type of person, the right caliber of candidate. They have the right sort of competence, and then identifying where that competence needs training and support. So typically you'll find businesses have background checks. They might be fairly straightforward. Your right to work in a particular country. They might check your employment history, some references, verification of identification. But then also there might be things around confidentiality agreements or non-disclosure agreements that are set up between the employee and the business. And it's trying to identify where those things need to occur, and introducing people as they join the business, that this is the process or this is the control that particular company wants to use going forwards. So for me, that's where the theme, or why the theme, is important in terms of people, because it's hugely beneficial to get staff on side and working in a particular way to develop that culture, and then that will help you improve your security posture, and hopefully will reduce the type of incidents that more common that most businesses identify.
Thank you, Frazer. So you started to talk about onboarding and recruiting. can you tell me a little bit more about how screening and pre-employment policies can help in this area?
Yeah, sure. So it's the first control within the people themed of controls is screening pre-employment checks. That's there because a business may have particular security needs that need to be met and adhered to. Most cases, certainly in the companies that URM engage with and that I've been involved in, it's the standard background check that's required. So as we've mentioned, your proof of address, proof of employment, the right to work, that kind of thing. But certain businesses may have more additional security requirements. So if they're engaged with government or military contracts or working alongside those sort of departments, there might be a need for a more stringent security check, sort of security clearance. So it's very similar to the basic check. There's just a few more things that they go more detail they go into. Sometimes they need to talk to your close relatives, that kind of thing. But also there may be things like more standard, the DBS checks, so the disclosure borrowing service, to check if anyone's got a criminal record. That may or may not be necessary depending on the company and the role that you're performing. But also there's checks around your CVs, checks around your qualifications, that kind of thing, that feed into that. So the control is there as I see it. It's almost a checkpoint. Have you got the ability to ask this kind of question when you're recruiting, bringing somebody on board? And that might naturally fall into a business's already existing onboarding process. And it may then sort of filter through to the people team or the HR team in terms of a checklist of things that they run through. So that's the kind of stuff that, where it's helpful in terms of, the business, that you are from the very outset ensuring that you're not recruiting somebody that is going to sort of potentially cause an issue around your own security requirements in that respect. So certainly that's my opinion in terms of why they're helpful.
And do you have any sort of key hints and tips for people control audits?
Yeah. So if I sort of run through the controls one by one, sort of briefly. So in terms of the first one, screening, as with all audits, the assessor, the auditor, whether it's internal or external, they're looking for evidence against a particular policy or process that it's being followed and adhered to. So for this particular one, you can kind of look at your existing onboarding process and look for any recent new starters that have joined. Anybody has had to go through your screening process, and then just identify a couple of examples, and then share that information, with the auditor. If there is a concern around, sharing of personal data, then it's fine to perhaps just show that, an individual was inducted on this particular date, the checks were completed, they were satisfactory and moved on. But quite often there are agreements between, the auditor and the company, like non-disclosure agreements. So it's usually fine for that sort of information to be shared for the sake of the audit in that respect. But yeah, the best way to be prepared there is just have some examples ready, lined up. It doesn't necessarily mean that the individual needs to be spoken to at that particular time. It's just evidence that the onboarding process has been followed. And if you've had maybe 5-10 new starters in the last 3-6 months, the auditor can select a few at random and then just investigate that the necessary steps have been followed in terms of the onboarding process. So that's how I'd approach, the first screening element. The second, 6.2, terms and conditions of employment. Well, it gives you a big hint in the actual title of it. It's looking for contractual agreements that state personnel or an organisation's responsibilities in relation to information security. So typically this is evidenced in a contract of employment or within the terms and conditions of a contract of employment. But you can also look beyond the employee in terms of when you have visitors to a particular site. There may be an induction for visitors where they have to be made aware of, the different terms and conditions around information security. It might be things like any information that you see, it's intellectual property. You can't write anything down, or you can't take photos and things like that. So that's where those kind of terms and conditions are identified. It's just how they're communicated then to to an individual employee or somebody that is visiting the location. So it's just identifying where you say that within your management system, and then having, again, some relevant examples to share with the assessor. 6.3, information security awareness, education and training. This one's pretty straightforward, providing the business is adapted a sort of program of training and awareness. And typically what an auditor's looking for is evidence that new people coming to the business have been made aware of the management system. They're given an opportunity to read and accept an information security policy. There might be other policies associated to that they're communicated with, like the access control or how to raise an incident, that kind of thing. And then also they're going to be looking for existing employees are also kept in the loop in terms of the management system. Usually we see annual refresher training is provided to existing staff. And again, what the assessor is looking for is evidence of whatever the company's process is. So if it states we shall induct new starters within the first month, evidence that that's taking place. And if there is an annual refresher training for all of the staff, evidence that that's also taken place. And then that can be, it may have been communicated on an email sent out globally, to the whole company, or it might be a more detailed training record, that's examined. Either's absolutely fine. It just depends on how the business is structured. The fourth one, disciplinary process. So similar to the terms and conditions with information security, here what the auditor is looking for is where a company is communicating to its employees and any other third party in that respect, that if their information security policies are not followed, there is a potential for repercussions. Now that might be written warnings right the way up to sort of formal disciplinary action. But what the assessor is looking for is, okay, where is it documented and how is that then communicated to an employee, as an example. So what we typically see is it's within the terms and conditions of the contract. There might be clauses within there around intellectual property, confidentiality, that kind of thing. And then they'll see that the individual has signed, and then that actual term and condition is in place. Other businesses that I've seen, it's something that they've added to every single policy that they've got. So there's a statement saying, if this policy is not followed, there are, or there is the potential of disciplinary procedures that might be implied. Again, either is fine. It just depends on how the business wants to structure it. But there needs to be some form of communication of the disciplinary process if you're not following, the information security policies and their requirements. And that's what the assessors are looking for. The fifth one, in terms of responsibility after termination and change of employment. So this, if we look at the termination side, it's really around restrictive covenants. So often when a person joins the company, one of the terms and conditions is if you do leave, you're not allowed to work with a similar business, or you're not allowed to divulge the information that you've come across, the intellectual property, for a number of years or months. It will state that. So that's clearly determining what the requirements are for somebody that leaves the business and then their contract is terminated. And equally, it's looking at a change of employment. So if somebody is working in sales and then they move into HR, the information that they're going to be made aware of is slightly different. There's more potential to be looking at personal information from an employee perspective if you're moving into the the human resources function, and it's ensuring that change in terms of accessibility of data is managed and monitored. So there may be a restriction in terms of certain business systems, based on the role in that respect. So there needs to be controls in place on how that actually manifests itself. And what the assessor will be looking for, again, is examples of people that have recently left, people that have recently changed position. And was there a determination of a change in information security requirements? And then how was that managed and how was that delivered? So typically that's, how they would go about that. The sixth is the confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements. So if we mentioned previously, this may be something that is already identified at the start of employment. The employee may need to sign a non-disclosure agreement, If so, just evidence that and show the assessor some recent examples. Typically, what is seen, with most businesses, is there is a non-disclosure agreement with suppliers, and then within that agreement there are terms and conditions very similar to the contract of employment. So what the assessor will look at is, again, some recent examples of that. So that's usually not too difficult, in terms of evidencing that particular control. It's just about getting yourself ready beforehand, and have some examples listed, that the auditor can choose, rather than trying to catch, the procurement team off guard during the audit and saying, oh, by the way, could you possibly share an example of? It's just preempting that sort of type of question beforehand and have those examples ready. The seventh one, 6.7, remote working. This lived in a different area of controls in the 2013 version of the standard. It's been brought into the people control due to lockdown and COVID recently, and the change of people's working environment. We now work from home a lot more. A lot of businesses have that hybrid setup, and the importance of this particular control is ensuring that people working from home or in a different location, the security requirements are still relevant, and it still has an importance. So businesses will look to sort of demonstrate that their clear desk or clear screen policy is communicated to staff that work from home, majority of the time. The storage of media, things like that, are still relevant, whether you're in the office or whether you're working from home. And it's just ensuring that individuals are aware of that particular control. So from the auditor's perspective, it will be, what is your control? What is your intent? And then can I see evidence of how that's been delivered? So there may be evidence of clear desk, clear screen policy being communicated, to staff that work from home. There may be a display screen assessment has been issued to people working from home, and are they assessing their working environment in the same way that you would do within the office, because the security requirements are extended to that home location. So yeah, that's how we sort of hints and tips in terms of approaching that particular one. And the final control, the eighth one, 6.8, information security event reporting. Similar to remote working, it's let's not forget about the staff that are not in the office, that don't necessarily see the notice boards or have that conversation around the coffee machine. It's ensuring that your process to raise information security incidents is well known, regardless of the location of the individual, where they're working. That if they come across an unusual looking email, whilst they're working from home, that they respond to that in the same way that you would do if you're in their office. Now, in the office, you might just pop over to the IT area and flag that. You don't have that ability when you're working from home. So companies need to look at, okay, how do we collectively raise incidents without having to contact somebody? So there might be a help desk function, that you contact to flag. There might be an email inbox, that you raise these things to. So it's making sure that all staff have that communication, can respond to that. And as you would do for the remote working, from an audit perspective, you're demonstrating that intent, that process, has been communicated to all staff, and that all staff have the ability to flag that. So you may want to look at your list of incidents and be able to determine that the individual that flagged them originally was a home worker. That would be perfect evidence, that the system's working, the process is robust. But again, it's just being prepared, having the incidents there for the auditor to look at, and then they can sort of choose where that investigation goes. So yeah, there would be my sort of top tips around that.
Thank you, Fraser. Just out of interest, where was that remote working control in the 2013 version? Was that a technical control before? Or?
Yeah, it lived within the control 14, I think it was. So it was around system development, maintenance, etc.
Right.
And it's just been regarded that actually it has more relevance under people. So it's a bit of a quirky one that it's dropped in there. But when you look at the the current activity that's going on, it kind of makes more sense. That people do work more from a remote location. And what it's trying to install is that there's no change to your information security management system just because you're at home or you're in an office that is just hot desking around and things like that. It's the same principles, the same posture still exists regardless of location. And hopefully that rings true, when you're being assessed or being audited, because your staff can verify that. I fully understand how to report an incident. I fully understand what data I should be storing, and it shouldn't be on my local drive. It needs to be on the company network drives, where there are those additional security controls and the ability to minimize the risk of an incident occurring.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Frazer.
Welcome.
And if any listeners want to read up on the subject, Frazer's written a blog on our website called Implementing and Auditing People Controls from ISO 27001-2022, and that's on urmconsulting.com. So do go and check that out. And thank you for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.